Okay, folks, we're right at 11. If everybody could have the seats, we're going to get started in just a minute. Great. Welcome, everyone. I'm Chris Rebelo. I'm the Senior Director of Communications here at the Buck Institute. It is so great to have people in this Drexler auditorium. I know that thing called the pandemic is supposed to be in our rearview mirror, but personally, I'm not taking this for granted. I think we should all give ourselves a huge round of applause for being here and showing up. Thank you. So, part of my job is to point out the emergency exits at the back of the auditorium, so consider that done. A few additional logistics. Please put your phone on silent. We have made some audio and visual upgrades here in the Drexler, and we'd like to have those shine through rather than cell phone rings going off, so that would be good. I hope you all got index cards when you came in. We're going to use those for the Q&A with Lee Hood in a little bit. A reminder, even though Lee is an MD, this event's not happening in a clinic, so please avoid any consultation questions that are personal. We'd like to have as general a conversation as possible. Greetings and welcome to those of you who are on Zoom. I'm looking at that Zoom camera right now. We're glad that you can join us. You too will have a chance to participate in the Q&A. What you need to do is enter your questions in the Q&A, not the chat box, and we will have somebody pick those questions up and get them to me here on the stage. So welcome to the Zoom audience. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Brian Van Weel, who's our Vice President and Chief Philanthropic Officer here at the Buck. Thanks, Brian.
Well, thank you, Chris, and welcome everyone to this year's Levy Community Seminar. These special seminars are made possible by the generosity of Bill and Elizabeth Levy. Oh, go right there. Every year, we get an opportunity in these seminars to share with you and our community some of the groundbreaking science and research on aging that's happening right here at the Buck. It was a happy day when Bill and Elizabeth first discovered the Buck Institute and became lifelong donors and supporters since 2002. Looking back over the past 20 years, it should come as no surprise that the Levy family and the Buck have enjoyed such a long and enduring relationship. It's easy to see, and in many ways, Bill and Elizabeth exemplified and embodied the core values and mission of the Buck. We study research on aging because we envision a future where health and vitality are preserved and enjoyed late into life, where the last chapters of our stories are replete with meaning and purpose and service and value. This is the story of Bill and Elizabeth. They were adventurous, they were curious and giving and family-focused through their entire lives. They traveled extensively together around the world, and they continued caring for and treating patients until Bill was just no longer able to physically do so. As medical professionals, Bill, a doctor with a dermatology practice here in Marin, specializing in skin care for amputees, and Elizabeth, a nurse at Bill's side for over 30 years. They valued science and research and education and evidence-based clinical treatment. They lived lives filled with compassion and service, and they dedicated their professional and their personal lives to making the world a better place, one patient, one person at a time. At the Buck, we're very focused on health span and increasing the healthy years of life, with our ultimate goal of helping people live better longer. Well, in every way, Bill and Elizabeth walked the talk. When Bill passed in 2005, Elizabeth was confronted with a devastating loss. But she began to reimagine the final chapters of her story. She began to actively pursue her passions for writing and travel. She took writing classes at the College of Marin. She founded a local writers group, and she began to travel again, extensively. She combined these two passions by authoring and publishing a travel journal called Carry On, Travels Around the Globe. For the next 10 years, she would travel the world, from China to Egypt, to Italy, to Croatia, to Australia, Antarctica, Ghana, Cuba, and Tanzania. Everywhere she went, she would fearlessly explore and meet new people that she would stay in contact with for the rest of her life. She also delighted in sharing her journeys with her family, with her daughter Anne and her beautiful grandchildren. It was in Ghana in 2007, while she was giving a lecture to a room full of nursing students, that she closed by saying, "You must carry on." It was something that Bill often said, and it was in that moment that the significance of those words really hit her. 2 years after Bill's passing, she realized that his legacy was going to carry on, and that by living the balance of her life with purpose and meaning, she would ensure that her legacy would carry on as well. Legacy and family were essential to Bill and Elizabeth, and their lives reflected that. They truly lived better longer. Anne and family, thank you for sharing your parents with us. Their stories and lives are part of the fabric of the Buck. And through these seminars, our story and legacy continue to carry on as well. We are eternally grateful to your family. And today, we get to share a very exciting new chapter in the Buck story. It is now my privilege to invite our President and CEO, Dr. Eric Verdin, to the stage to introduce today's featured speaker.
Good morning, everyone. I realized someone just took my notes. I could probably do it without notes, but just wanted to welcome you this morning. It's really wonderful to see a full room, mostly without masks. I hope those of you still wearing masks soon will be able to shed them, and for all of us to go back to essentially what was our lives before. So I want to also add my thanks to the Levy family to join them in celebrating their parents, Bill and Elizabeth. I think the seminar and the fact this annual seminar is always something I look forward to. As you know, when I joined, I thought that the Buck should really become the gem of Marin County, and not only of Marin, but Sonoma, Napa, and the whole San Francisco Bay Area. And the fact that you're all here today speaks to the fact that there is a hunger in our community to learn how to live better longer, and also to help us support what we're trying to do, which is really to bring this reality to not only the Bay Area, but to the world. And I'm delighted to let you know that this is working. So we're on our way to really making a difference in people's lives all across the world. Thank you again for bringing us together, and I look forward to next year again. There's so much excitement right here at the Buck. As you've said, we were somewhat stopped in our tracks about 3 or 4 years ago when the pandemic hit us. And I'm glad to tell you that we've emerged out of this stronger, and there's a lot of excitement at the Buck in terms of what the future will be for us. I'm also delighted to let you know that we are going to increase these seminars, and starting next month, every Wednesday, we will have a community seminar, and we'll bring more speakers. So. No, I'm sorry, did I say every week? Okay, sorry, once a month. I don't want to tax you. Once a month, and we'll bring both internal seminars, but also friends and colleagues who are interested in coming to speak to you. And really realize this vision that we have, that there's a tendency right now from what you've seen around the world that science and scientists are somewhat misunderstood. And this really came to a head for me in my own head, seeing the response to the pandemic, where scientists actually ended up being politicized, attacked, vilified. Tony Fauci is a friend, and there's nothing that has been more disturbing for me than to see that someone who took a public stance and acknowledged mistakes and so on ended up becoming a political pawn into a game that goes way beyond what science should ever dealing with. So I'm determined to make sure that the aging space and the buck is represented in a way and engages the community to let you know what we're doing. We have no evil intention. The only thing we think of is really increasing the quality of our lives, all of us. I don't want to take too much time away from our speaker, but I just want to mention also that the buck is really entering a new phase. And the talk that you're going to hear this morning is a reflection of this, probably the best reflection. When I joined about 7 years ago, the vision that I sold to our board of trustees, and which actually got me this job, is the idea that aging research is really interesting, and we've made enormous strides in the last 20 years, mostly working on small animal models, fruit flies, little worms, C. elegans, that some of you have seen, mice, and so on. And this is very nice, and this work needed to be done, but we've entered a phase now, which started about 5 to 7 years ago, where these discoveries could have an impact on how we age. And I'm determined to really transform the buck and make it not only a basic research institute, but an institute that focuses on translating these discoveries for human health. And we've been building a number of initiatives that you probably have heard through the newsletter, and today will be a great example of this, of what directions we are going to in the future. Another example of this is the new clinical center. As you walked in the atrium, you probably saw on your right, there is a new clinical center, and the buck is now engaged in 4 different clinical trials. And I encourage you, if you're interested, to volunteer to some of these trials. Right now, we're conducting clinical trials on some novel ketone body esters, and soon we'll be publishing some of these results. So this is really a big transition, really taking the basic science and bringing it to the clinic, and really testing in a rigorous manner what works and what doesn't work, what is safe and what is not. So our goal is to extend healthy lifespan and really change the equation that most people have in their lives about what it means to age. I think we will always get sick and we will always die, but we want to minimize the fraction of our lives that we spend in a state that is not consistent with maximum enjoyment, performance, and so on. So thank you for being here and helping us support us in this direction. So another huge reason for the excitement here at the Buck is the presence of Lee Hood today. And I don't know where to start, because I could probably spend the next hour and a half with his CV going through everything that Lee has accomplished. I'll just say one word. Lee is a legend in biology, period. I'll just say a few words about what his accomplishments are, and then I will actually let you enjoy his presence. Lee co-founded 17 biotech companies, including Amgen, which many of you know. So he also invented the technology, automated DNA sequencing, which led to the the whole Human Genome Project you've heard, which was completed in 2010. And just to give you a perspective on what this revolution meant, it cost $3 billion to sequence the first human genome. And today, if anyone wants to guess what it costs to sequence a human genome, anybody wants to guess? No. 100. So you're not far off, but there's prediction that the $10 human genome will become a reality based on the technology that's coming out today. So when you think about the scale of the acceleration, this is going to be transforming medicine. And Lee really was at the core of the technology that led to this type of discovery. But you would have thought that based on this, he could have stopped and retired. He hasn't. He's the hardest working man I know. I have a hard time keeping up with him, and he's still working and still fully active and engaged in a whole new project that he will describe to you, which I think is equally exciting. Just to give you, to put his career in perspective, he has published hundreds of papers, one of the most cited scientists in the world. There are throughout the world, about 6,000 scientists that are members of 3 national academies that we have here. National Academy of Medicine, National Academy of Science, National Academy of Engineering. They're incredibly prestigious. There are only 20 scientists who are members of all 3, and Lee is one of them. So amazing accomplishment. It is a reflection of all what he has done for science. He also, in one of his most notable achievements, he received the National Medal of Science from President Barack Obama. So we're thrilled also not only to have Lee as a speaker today, but also to have him as a member of our faculty. Lee joined us last September as a distinguished professor, also as a member of the executive team, as Chief Innovation Officer, and co-director of a new Center for Phenomic Health, which Lee will tell you about. So I have no doubt that Lee and our work with him will change medicine. And hopefully today you will get a glimpse of what this new medicine will look like. So I want to invite Lee and Chris. Lee's first, and then Chris will join him. Please help me join. Welcome.
Okay, thank you. Well, it's a real pleasure to be here. And I'm going to talk about the future of medicine, which I've renamed Radical Health. And you'll come to understand exactly why I think it's radical. So the first question is, why is health important? And the simple answer is because it underpins every invaluable quality of a human being. Our early development, our ability to learn, the jobs we do, the communities that we create and so forth, and productivity and creativity and thinking out of the box, all of those are enormously enhanced by health. And that's why I would argue health is every bit as important to the world as any of the major problems we face, energy, the environment, any of these other things. And it's something that's been long ignored because most people's view of health is I'm not sick. And that is exactly the wrong way to think about it. And we'll talk about why that's so. So the question then is, what do I mean by this radical health? What I mean is we're going to move to a place where we'll replace our current disease focus on healthcare with wellness and prevention. It'll be transformative. It will change the quality of everybody's health. It will decrease the cost of healthcare enormously. And most interestingly, it will move us to a place where we can do everything simply and a tome, and yet be our optimal selves. And I'd argue at this point in time, most of you, even if healthy, are perhaps 20 or 30% of what you could be. So there's room for enormous enhancement. And the enhancement of all these qualities that we actually talked about. And the approach for doing this is a data-driven analysis of a human being. And I think the analogy Michelangelo gave when he looked at a block of marble and said, David is in this block, I just have to chip away at the edges. And what is really interesting for each of you is contained in your body is the information we can use to assess your current health, to predict your health trajectory, and to optimize it in every way. And the approach that we're going to use is something called the genome and the phenome. The genome is your basic set of chromosomes, and it regulates the potential development you have in your life, okay? The phenome, on the other hand, refers to the fact that we change as we develop. You're an infant up to an older person, and many other different phenotypes as you go through your entire life. And what's interesting is the phenotypes that you get are in part determined by the genome, but probably far more by 1, your behavior, and 2, your environment. And we can measure these phenomic consequences by looking at blood analytes and your gut microbiome and digital health measurements and a whole variety of different things. And the really important point I'd like to leave you with is an analogy of when a composer writes a piece of music, it's essentially a digital output of his concept of how he'd like to give you something. What counts is what the conductor and the orchestra do with that music. It can be played with passion and vigorousness and excitement. And you know, it's exactly the same. Your genome gives you your potential. Your phenome is what takes you where you're going to go. And in a sense, you're the conductor of all the things that govern the phenome and your own health trajectory. And a key responsibility for you then is to learn about what health is, really beyond just not being diseased and so forth. And in fact, I think the whole vision of health and your health trajectory is an interesting one because it has 3 phases. Most of us are born in wellness, and we maintain that wellness. I mean, young people, for the most part, think they're invincible because they've never really been sick, okay? And that's a danger in trying to optimize wellness, I'll tell you. But wellness, for all of us, sooner or later, will transition to disease. So the 3 aspects of health are wellness, that transition point, and that transition point occurs years before it ever manifests itself as the disease. And in that initial transition point is the key to prevention, because the disease process is simple then and can be reversed far more easily than if you let it mature and differentiate over a period of 3 or 4 years. And I will say with the phenomics, we have really powerful ways to measure wellness. We can detect early transitions to disease years before their manifestation and begin to think about how to reverse them. And of course, we can deal more effectively with disease as well. What is interesting is over the years, we set up a program a company that was all focused on scientific wellness called Aravale, and demonstrated in 5,000 people over a 4-year period exactly how powerful this data-driven health is. And in fact, from those data have come now more than 25 different papers in leading journals, and each of those papers gives us a vignette into what wellness is or what disease prevention is. And those papers include, one, the ability to take your blood and other kinds of data and from statistical relationships to identify uniquely for each individual a whole series of actionable possibilities that can either improve wellness or let you avoid disease, okay? Number two, we demonstrated that in the 5,000 people, 167 transitioned to disease. We looked at 10 that had transitioned to various kinds of cancers, and for every one of them, we found diagnostic markers in the blood anywhere between 1 and 4 years prior to the onset of disease. So that can routinely be done. And the reason this is so important is because chronic disease consumes 86% of a 4.4 trillion healthcare budget per year. And suppose over a 10-year period, we could get rid of half of the chronic diseases on the way to eventually eliminating them. The savings would be in the trillions of dollars. So that gives you an idea of what this data-driven medicine can actually do. A third thing we were able to demonstrate, because we had people from 21 to 93, is we could generate an algorithm that measured your biological age from blood analytes, and it was able to demonstrate for every year a woman in Aravale stayed in this wellness program, she lost 1.8 years of biological age. And for men, they lost 0.8 years. And I think the difference had to do with compliance, frankly. But we don't know. And the final point that I'd make in this regard is, when is the last time your doctor ever asked you, how is your brain? And I'll guess it's never been done. And I think a critical part of healthcare in the future is going to be our ability to assess and optimize each of your 25 major cognitive features: memory, reaction time, depth of field, those kinds of things. And there are digital devices that can be used, put out by a company called Posit, pioneered by Michael Persenich, that gives one the ability to retain. And what he pointed out, and he won the Kevley Prize for, is an ordinary person has his major cognitive abilities, his or her, at about 35 or so, and then almost all of us decline thereafter. And what he demonstrated that was really striking is, with 1,000 people, he demonstrated that a majority of them could be returned to near the level they should have been in their mid-30s. So there's hope for every single one of us that you can not only maintain cognitive abilities, but you can correct deficiencies that have arisen and so forth. So 3 years ago, I started Phenome Health, which is a nonprofit institute, and it's really dedicated to using genomics and phenomics in this data-driven approach to health. And this, as you'll see, is a very broad context of possibilities. So in the short term, there are two kinds of activities that are working on. We're collaborating with a major healthcare system, and actually with the UAE, the royalty therein, in a wellness, scientific wellness program, just as I described for Aerofail. And the second short-term thing is we're taking the 4 major chronic diseases and we're going to use a big data approach to analyzing them over a period of 4 years and doing it in such a way that we can reconstitute the entire life history of the disease transition with its major subtypes and its major transitions to pathology, so we know how to deal with them far more effectively in the future. And we'll be starting together with the Buck with this endeavor in the next month or so. We've raised the money to get the first initiative started with type 2 diabetes, and together with the Buck and another institute, we're designing a Alzheimer's trial that will take exactly the same approach. And the key purpose in the Alzheimer's trial is to be able to identify through blood analytes the very earliest transition of Alzheimer's, because we're quite confident if we can do that, we can reverse the Alzheimer's before it ever manifests itself. And I think that'll be true of all neurodegenerative diseases in the future. So those are the kind of short-term things that we're working on getting started on now. The long-term thing, the real challenge, is I'm proposing a second genome initiative called the Human Phenome Initiative, where we'll ask the government to pay for looking at 1 million individuals over a 10-year period with the genome phenome analysis. And it'll do exactly the 3 things I talked about earlier, only it'll provide statistical evidence that doctors and the skeptics can all accept. Improving your health, saving enormous amounts of money, and creating the technology that can let you do all this at home very inexpensively. So that's the hope for the future. Now, I will say also we're using all of the tools of AI, and I won't go into the technical details. There are many tools that you can use that are very powerful, including digital twins and knowledge graphs and large language models and all of these kind of things. But what we hope to be able to do within a 3 or 4 year period is to take the enormously complex data, phenomic and genomic data of a single individual, and to put it into this AI tool and have it spit out for that individual all of the actionable possibilities. And we think, frankly, for most people, there are going to be 100 plus, but we'll prioritize those that should be taken care of in the beginning. And then what this AI will do is send that to your physician along with a description of what he needs to do, he or she needs to do, and the clinical evidence that these actionable possibilities are totally justified. And that means we're actually going to be able to make physicians who will partner with AI in this regard super docs, because they'll have domain expertise of the entire field of medicine and will be able to deliver it to their patients in a way never before in history could this be done. And this is the powerful, attractive feature about AI, and there are downsides. We can talk about those, but I am excited about this. So I will say also a really important part of this initiative is education. And I'll just say some of the things we're doing, and we can talk about them later if you wish. One, we're just getting ready to publish a textbook on systems biology and systems medicine. And the medical chapters have been used to create a high school course on the future of medicine, very much like what I've talked about here. And we've tested it now. We're in the second year of testing. It's really received superb reviews. It's something that can be spread easily across the country. We did this for systems biology about 12 years ago. And I can say now that that 4-module course we generated has been viewed in 100 different countries in every state in the US. And we're approaching 4 million students. And that's what we'd like to do with this. And I'll tell you, the people that graduate from this course will know far more than 98% of the doctors in the world about what the future is. But even more important, you know, the really important thing about all of this medicine, and it's where we converge absolutely with the buck, is this idea of expanding your health span into the hundreds, 90s or hundreds, where you're mentally alert and physically capable, everything like that. But the really interesting question for you to all think about is, if you get a 20-year span of extra functional, creative, passionate life, what are you going to do with it? And, you know, I think playing golf and tennis is going to get, or maybe watching football is going to get boring after a while. I think one of the key things we have to teach kids is you have to be a lifelong learner, and you should be doing something with your life that makes a difference to the world. Those are two really fundamental goals we should aim for. I will say, if you think about this data-driven health, it absolutely handles the 5 major challenges we have in healthcare today. So one challenge is the quality of healthcare in the United States. Of the top 20 developed countries, we're at the bottom, even though we spend 3 times as much money as the next highest individual. We've got long ways to go. The second thing is we have an enormously aging population. And this is where the Buck's approach to living longer better and the scientific wellness approach to living longer better really not only converge, but in many ways they're exactly the same thing. We are attacking exactly the same kind of problem. The third thing, of course, is just this explosion of chronic diseases. And suppose we can use these blood diagnostics to prevent you from getting chronic diseases in the future. A fourth point is racial disparity in records and stuff. And I'll argue the major racial disparity is in data. So in the million-person project, we're going to guarantee we have the right kind of representation and racial diversity and so forth. And of course, the final challenge is the cost. And again, I think we can handle that very easily. So returning again to this radical health, I can see, you can begin to see that the radical health is really the only reasonable path we should take to health. Thank you.
So if you have questions, now is the time to write them on the index cards. Volunteers will come around to pick them up. If you need more cards, let me know. That's your chair, Lee. I'm going to sit right next to you. Whoops, I got to get my clicker.
Which chair do you want?
Right there, my dear.
Okay.
Whoops. Okay, let's see, hold on. So what I wanted to do is to ask Lee to give us a sense of what this actually looks like in real people and some of what's been done in Aravelle. So I want to talk about traditional body mass index. We're all familiar with it. There's a problem with that, Lee, right? And how does the phenomic approach get us to a better place?
Okay. Traditional body mass index is measured by taking your height and by taking your weight. And those are variables that don't change very much and certainly don't change very rapidly. And they are good at a general prediction of what's going to happen with chronic diseases and things like that. But for example, 30% of the population really gets misindexed by this, that traditional measures of BMI. And the classic example is really muscular athletes turn out to be grossly obese because they're just big. So we recently developed a new approach to measuring body mass index by using analytes in the blood, and they reflect the metabolism of the body in very dynamic, rapid ways. And one, we use this to validate some of the general things the old body mass indicated, and two, take 30% of the people that were kind of undiagnosable and divide them into really interesting groups. For example, there is a 10% of our population that is really has, by our metric, a very unusual body mass index and indicates something basically is wrong. We were able to take, for example, obese people and stratify them in really interesting ways in keeping with new therapeutic approaches to obesity. So the whole point is, and let me just say, a disease like Alzheimer's is a disease of metabolism. It's a disease of cholesterol. So this is a marvelous index in beginning to make predictions of drifting toward pathology and things like that. And this, together with the biological age index I said earlier, are examples of metrics that we should be using at each blood draw you get. And I'd argue you ought to get blood draws twice a year or something like that, because they tell us exactly where you are in your health trajectory or your metabolic trajectories, and they give us insights into where we need to go and what we need to do to optimize them.
So let's talk about cardiovascular risk.
Okay. So what has really been interesting from the genome is we've been able to do genetic studies to identify collections of genes that make small contributions to various kinds of pathology. And in one of these cases, we, that's the collective scientific community, did really detailed study of the propensity to have high LDL cholesterol. And that's basically a proxy for cardiovascular disease. And the findings were really striking. And we were able to demonstrate with the Airvale population, if you had a very high risk for LDL cholesterol and you had high cholesterol, the only way you could bring it down is through chemistry, statins and other related kinds of compounds. Conversely, if you had a low genetic risk for LDL cholesterol and had high LDL cholesterol, you could bring it down beautifully with diet and exercise and things like that. So the basic point that's going to turn out to be true is once we calculate any of the 200 or more genetic risks that we know today, we're going to want to treat the high-risk people differently from the low-risk people. And one of the things about very high-risk people that have bad chemistry for that disease, it means you're just about to transition to that other disease, so we should start the preventive measures for type 2 diabetes or cancer or whatever these other things are immediately.
So you mentioned statins, and I want to recommend Lee's book, The Age of Scientific Wellness, if you want a good picture of what's wrong and how to fix it, I recommend it. But there's something in the book jacket that like made my head snap. It said something about that, what the 10 most commonly prescribed drugs don't do much for the majority of people.
Yeah.
And I know statins, there's questions about, do statins, so that, I was like, oh my God. So how can that be, Lee, that like, those drugs don't work for many people? What's at play?
Well, that's a really complicated question, but let me define exactly what the study was. So this was a study in Nature that was done maybe 10 years ago, and what the author did was to look at the 10 most common selling drugs. So statins and anticoagulant for blood and all of these kinds of things. And he showed strikingly that if you looked at these 10 different things, the number of people that could use the drug effectively varied from 1 in 25 to 1 in 4. And the average of the 10 drugs was slightly less than 1 in 10 people were helped. And that means the other 90% are both exposed to the cost of these drugs. Some of them are very expensive, and the side effects of these drugs. So it's obviously an undesirable thing to do. And so what I think is key is with phenomics, we can beautifully get biomarkers that will say, for this type of statin, here are the people that will respond, and here are the people that won't. And of course, pharma really, really dislikes that. But the other thing about pharma that is really interesting is when they do drugs for the common chronic diseases and things like that, mostly they're focused on one symptom. And the drug deals with the symptom, but the symptom is one of 30 things that's wrong in that particular disease. So a single drug, if you've let the disease mature to its full length, is just not going to do it. And where we see it today is there are people who argue precision medicine in cancer is the most magnificent thing that's ever happened. And I read a New York Times article, a month ago, 2 months ago, about a woman diagnosed with breast cancer in 2015 who'd gone through 8 successive targeted treatments. And each of them gave her a few months to maybe up to a year. And so a lot of that period of time, she was really, targeted chemotherapeutic drugs are really devastating to the human body. They kill a lot of normal cells as well as a lot of the cancer cells. So what I'm saying is, in the end, the only true prevention is going to be to do it early and reverse it early and not let it get to be late. And this is exactly what's happened with Alzheimer's. And the statistics on Alzheimer's are utterly shameful. For 12 years, there have been more than 500 clinical trials. Until very recently, 0 had worked. And you're talking about clinical trials at $1 billion or so. And these were trials that, for the most part, were focused on particular molecules, and time again, these failed. And so the consequence, the conclusion ordinary people would have reached 11 years ago is, gee, maybe this is a symptom rather than a cause. And when you fix that symptom, you don't fix the disease. And I think that is something pharma is really struggling with today, because with most chronic diseases, by the time you manifest them clinically, they're really complicated, and you're not going to cure them with one drug, probably not going to cure them with 2 or 3 drugs.
So I've gotten a number of questions from folks, and it was one of my questions. So given that you haven't got quite to the point yet where you've turned around the healthcare system for us, what should people do today? Like what advice? Should we be wearing trackables? What should we be tracking? What can we do today?
So the first thing you can do today is find some trusted sources where you can learn about what wellness is. And the book I wrote has a lot of these and makes a lot of different recommendations there. But I think you have to educate yourself as to the options. So look, the traditional aspects of wellness are terribly important. I think the most important thing I do for my own health is exercise, frankly. And I'm really a fanatic. I spend 40 minutes a day, and it doesn't matter what my schedule is, I get that done, and it makes an enormous difference in how I feel. And my argument is that the anaerobic exercise is really important because as you get older, your brain gets less and less oxygenation. And the regions that die first are those that are reflected in Alzheimer's. So you want to be healthy and vigorous and keep that up. But the same is true of diet, the same is true of sleep, same is true of stress. Those are all things that are important. I'll tell you, for most people, maybe not here, I don't see it as much, but when I go to the Midwest, I would say 90% of the people should lose anywhere from 20 to 50 pounds. I mean, and doing that just transforms your life and yet it's such a difficult thing to do. And I found it really easy with intermittent fasting, just to get used to doing all your eating in an 8-hour period in the day and not I skip breakfast and sometimes I skip lunch, and making sure you have the nutrients you need and everything like that. But I think weight is really a big thing. What the data-driven health allow us to do increasingly is to take each of those major aspects of health, exercise, diet, sleep, and stress, and specify specifically for you things you can do to really ameliorate these kinds of things. So I think that the major thing is to get educated and to deal with the major health issues, a reasonable diet, reasonable sleep, reasonable exercise, and things like that. And learning how for you to deal with stress. I think those are all terribly important. What scientific wellness does is then let you optimize your own health based on thousands of measurements from molecules throughout your body, which have the ability to sample most of your organ systems and assess whether they're healthy or not, and if not, what kinds of things you can begin to do. In many cases, we can say, gee, this isn't so good. We don't know what to do about it. But in other cases, we have remedies for it. But it all starts with realizing if you feel really great now, wouldn't you like to be able to feel that way when you're 90 or 100? And to be creative and productive and a part of society and doing things that still change the world in a big way or in a small way. And we can change the world locally or nationally or internet. I mean, you should have the potential to make those choices.
So we got a great question about genomic test. Many people, and I have a corollary to the question, many people are afraid of having their genome sampled because they fear insurance companies will use the data to deny coverage. Is that a challenge to be overcome? And when you talked about the drugs that don't work for everybody based on their genetics, so if I go out and I get my genome done, what do I do with that data? Do I take it to my doctor? Like, how do you make sense? Because it is getting much more affordable to get your genome analyzed.
Right.
So if people here want to do that, what should they do? And are you concerned about the privacy issues with that and how it might impact insurance coverage? So 2 questions in one.
Okay, well, the privacy issues are totally different from the insurance issues. The privacy issues, I think we can really deal with. The insurance issue is an issue. Now, Obamacare and GINA are 2 laws for health insurance that block insurance companies from being able to eliminate you based on your genetics. Where you aren't protected is probably where you need to be protected most, and that's long-term health insurance. Frankly, many people couldn't even afford that, what it costs these days now. But I think the discrimination from that point of view is something we really have to attend to. And there's a very well-known candidate for presidency who's advocating that we eliminate all of those kind of laws. And it would be an utter disaster if we lost the protection for health insurance too. So I think the discrimination thing is the one thing we have to deal with. But I think privacy, confidentiality, all of those kind of things, they're really good and effective ways for doing them now. We could talk about them, but I think they're technical and pretty straightforward.
So if folks go, okay, I'm going to take the leap, I'm going to get my genome done and analyzed, what the heck do they do with the information after they got it?
Well, that is a challenge. So there are 2 things. There are programs out there that can analyze genome information, and they give it to you at various levels. And exploring some of those programs and seeing what you can understand is really key. There is a company, a couple of companies out there that will do your genome for a reasonable cost, and then for an additional cost will analyze maybe 100, 150 features of that genome, and that's probably what you'd want anyway. So I would say there are places you can go and have this done and get information that tells you which defective genes you have. The companies, the reason it isn't clearer is because 23andMe tried to be very general about describing limitations, and the FDA viewed that as practicing medicine and shut them down for almost a year. So companies have to be somewhat circumscribed in saying they're not suggesting you do anything. That was one of the major failures of Verifail, and the reason it only went 4 years. I think it's the most important company I ever started. It was a financial failure because we didn't have physicians associated, and partly because people didn't realize how important scientific wellness was and weren't even to pay. I mean, in the US, we're used to having our insurance cover everything, and we don't want to pay anything extra for the extra things we get. In China, it is totally different. They're used to paying enormous extra sums to get better health, and it works very well for them.
So 2 questions here. People want to know what behaviors have you changed, and what have you found out about your own self through your system, and then also questions about people. A lot of folks want to know about how do you decide what vitamins to take? Like, there's so many supplements out there. Yeah. So talk about yourself, and then what that larger question is about supplements.
Well, one of the real problems we had in Airvale is when we got things that were clearly a medical diagnosis, we had to give the thing to the patient and ask them to take it to their doctor. And we found there were 3 classes of doctors and about equal representation. There were those that were really enthusiastic, embraced it, it worked beautifully. There were those who were indifferent and said, don't bother me, I don't have the time to think about this. And there were the physicians that were really defensive and hostile. And I'm really happy to say many of those physicians lost their customers to other. Now, there are a class of physicians called functional medicine physicians, and there are quacks and there are very, very good people. So one of the major ways I changed my healthcare was to find a really superb functional physician who believed in all the things I did and had all the medical knowledge. And ideally, I think that's a course I'd recommend to you. And if you have access to recommendations, or we could find them, I'm sure, if we needed to do that. I think that's one thing. But I think I lost about 25 pounds in the course of the Aerofail program and everything. And so I weigh what I played football in college at right now. Now, I have to say it's kind of cheating because I'm sure I have many more fat cells than muscle cells that I had at that time. But at least that was what I aimed at getting back to, when I was young and could run forever and not have to worry about things. The diet, I think, is really important, and I think here I believe in moderation. I'll have a steak very occasionally, and I think one of the big things that's coming to really be something to watch is how much you should drink. And there are people who are really knowledgeable who argue the right answer is 0. Now, I frankly would find 0 pretty hard to put up with. Anyway, I suspect so. And I do follow the chemistry of my blood, which is a window to health and disease, because it has molecules from all your organs secreted into it, and if you know how to read them, you can really make assessments about many different of your organs and where they are. So the blood analysis that we had in Aerofail, good functional medicine doctors can do the same kinds of things. I will tell you, one of the technical limitations of Aerofail was how many blood tubes we had to draw. And that's because there are a class of blood analytes called clinical chemistries, and those are really important because they're tied to actionable possibilities. But the LabCorps and Quests of the world charge enormously for those things. And I'm on a mission now to get the cost of those down tenfold, because, and my argument is, if we have thousands upon thousands and hundreds of thousands of people using these, we can afford to bring the cost down. But the amount of blood that's necessary should be brought down too in many cases. For example, if you want to know, I mean, 2 metals you really should know about are mercury and lead. And they both require a fair amount of blood in order to make the analyses. And it could be done absolutely trivially cheaper. So we hope we can get all these costs down to the point, again, where we can do wellness at home rather than wellness in a hospital.
So for those of us who get, blood work done once a year at our doctor for our annual checkup, are there specific tests that we should be asking for that maybe are not commonly included in the, you get your cholesterol panel, okay, but are there things things that we're missing?
Yes, the answer is yes, but, and they're increasing in number, as a matter of fact. So we're actually, for these new individual trials we're going to be doing with the healthcare system and with the royalty of UAE, compiling lists. And maybe in a 3 or 4 month period, we'll have a list of things that we feel are the kind of bare minimum things you should do if you're on a wellness program. We could make those certainly available to people.
keep an eye on our website, because as soon as Lee gets that information to us, we will get it to you. So just to let you know that. Talk about, you mentioned while you talked about cancer. Well, first, let's talk about brain plasticity, because I think the thing that people are most terrified about is being of sound body, but not sound mind as we get older. So how does it work? How do we turn back the clock inside our noggins?
So let me just say, in the book she has there, I have a really great chapter on brain health, but the essence of it is the following. And I already stated it very concisely. Michael Berzenish has always been convinced that cognition and cognition loss are very plastic. And what he designed are a series of digital assays, and they're basically games. So let me give you an example. One of the games is, so you look at them on your computer, or maybe you could do it on a cell phone. It might be a little harder to do on a small screen. But for example, what you see when you start this one game, and this one game has to do with peripheral vision, okay, is you see an explosion of about 20 birds that fly out toward the edge of the screen, and one of those 20 is different, and you have to identify him. And as the game progresses, the difference becomes more and more subtle, and you can actually learn and be trained in that depth of field perception and reaction time too, because it explodes out very rapidly and you have just a fixed amount of time to make the decision. And it's games like this that you can use to reconstitute depth of field. And in fact, Tom Brady used exactly those kind of games for two things: reaction time and depth of field. He said it made an enormous, and the reason he went into his 40s and won a Super Bowl actually was he felt it was in large part reconstituting his reaction times and his depth of field as a quarterback. And so you can do those for 25 different kinds of cognitive feature, including memory, which is the one most of us worry about. And these things are remarkable. And they have the ability to forecast the possibility of neurodegenerative diseases, depression, and even schizophrenia. And the question of whether once you have these, you can use them to bring them back to normal, that's being studied now. But I think, you know, the idea is your brain should be exercised just like your heart is if we're to keep it healthy, and this is a great way to exercise it. So we're also going to add other kinds of tests, EEG kind of tests and things like that, and imaging tests for the brain. And I think we can really transform brain health in very, very interesting ways. And of course, what's interesting about metabolic PET scanning is it can predict Alzheimer's 15 years before the clinical diagnosis ever happens by already these subtle changes in your brain in those areas that are most susceptible to Alzheimer's. And again, it has to do with metabolism and oxygenation and all of these different kinds of things. So all of these things tie together beautifully.
So I just want to, the company that Lee's talking about is Posit Health. I want to give my own recommendation. Mike Mercenich talked here a number of years ago. I had surgery, and he gave me some protocols to do before I had surgery. My brain was fine afterwards. I mean, you know, you can, if you're facing surgery, do the right games and it protects your brain during the whole thing. It was remarkable.
Well, I think the other thing with major surgery like cardiac bypass is make sure you have a good anesthesiologist. No, I mean, seriously, there are a lot of people that drop serious IQ points going through triple bypasses if you're not really careful with proper oxygenation and all. It's a long procedure.
So
Yeah.
I want to point out we're 10 minutes past. Everybody seems really happy to be here, which is a testament to what we're talking about today. So thank you very much. But we need to start wrapping up. Talk about, I think, so Alzheimer's is the biggest fear. The next one is cancer. What's the promise of phenomic health when it comes to cancer?
I think the big promise is early diagnosis, so you won't have to worry about frank disease, okay? I think the second thing is using phenomics to understand the changes that have occurred at that early diagnostic point so we can most effectively provide the curative features. I mean, I think cancer is the one transition we really stand a great shot at getting right away, and that's because of immunotherapy. That is, it can go after things that are foreign in your body that you can't even see, that are at very low levels, and clean them up nicely. And the hypothesis is if we can get it early enough and activate your own immune system to target those transitions. And what happens with the cancer is it develops a whole series of ways to avoid the immune system, and we've now discovered a lot of ways we can block those avoidances. And if we can do that early, I think cancer will be one of the ones we can deal with earliest. I think the second one we can deal with very early, because I think in the end, Alzheimer's is largely a disease of your behavior. Bad diet, bad exercise, bad all sorts of things, and bad metabolism. And we know ways that you can deal with those kinds of things now, too.
That's great. I want to thank you so much for being part of the Buck and being here today. It's great. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
So if you enjoyed today, I want to reiterate the news that Eric shared. We're going to be doing more community seminars. They're going to start in April, the first Wednesday of the month for the most part. The first one is going to focus on exercise. And Simon Meloff, our resident exercise aficionado and expert, I'm going to be sitting down and talking with him, similarly to how I talked to Lee today. Keep an eye on your email because we'll send out information on that. I got questions from people who want to sign up for clinical trials. Keep an eye on our website. We'll be sending out emails when we have that set up and we actually know who we need to sign up for the clinical trials. So I would be remiss if I let you get out of the room without making a quick pitch to be generous with the buck, to please consider donating. Please listen to your most generous self before you leave today. So your donations make a real difference. So this seminar happened today because of your donations. Our recent clinical trial, our bike trial, that was kick-started by donations. We recently published an important paper about a protein that shows real promise for rejuvenating the brain. That was kick-started by donations. So you can have a huge impact here, really, seriously. So I know folks, Brian's here, Lisa's here from philanthropy. If you want to talk to somebody out in the lobby, please talk to them and consider really becoming an active member here at the Buck. And of course, you can always go to our website. The Donate Now button is easy to find. So thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it. And watch your emails. We hope to see you back in April when we talk about exercise.